when unions throw millions of dollars into ad campaigns to promote their point of view with respect to an establishment system, a monopoly public education system, that's all fine. That money is not corrupting. But money that comes to support reform is somehow evil, questionable, we have to worry about this, this is nefarious.
Is the onus on innovators and private sector educators to make the case to whether they're Californians or Americans across the country, as you visited and discovered what's going on during the film, which we'll talk about in a second? Or is it a matter, do you think, of just sort of like reform the public education system, disrupt it, sort of break the logjam, and then sort of parents and families will come to see the light on their own? What do you think?
The more school choice opportunities that are given to parents, they are lining up by the millions for these opportunities. There are 1 million kids today on charter school waiting lists, just the waiting lists, all right? And so you can look at places where there has been a long tradition of bashing charter schools or bashing vouchers and school choice. And just this week, Newark, New Jersey, for example, offered parents this One Newark plan. They get to put their preference of schools, both charter and traditional schools. A majority of the parents of the kindergarten kids entering the system selected charter schools as their first choice, okay? You look at New Orleans, who this fall will have a 100% charter school system, the only one in the country. The only one even close to that, by the way, in the country. Second, I think, is Washington, D.C., with about 44% kids in charters. But yes, I think that when you make these choices available, the more that the choices are made available, the longer the lines get. It's essentially a jailbreak. Once these opportunities come to parents, they take them. They line up around the block for these new schools, because there's an essential difference in a school where every year, if they don't have new parents knocking on the door saying, please take my kid because your school is awesome, if you don't have those people knocking on the door every year, you go out of business. You run your school differently than if you're the kind of school that doesn't have to do anything because people are assigned to you. You can lean back, you can do things the way they've been done before, and there's no accountability, no consequences.
You mentioned New Orleans is a city where there's some real education reform taking place. Governor Bobby Jindal in Louisiana, someone who's come to the forefront a little bit in the midst of the Common Core controversy.
Fighting his own head of education, his own education chief, John White, who's sticking with Common Core. Bobby Jindal has now reversed and moved against Common Core.
Well, this is a group of board that he appointed, basically. Everyone is on board.
Indeed. It's a Poulos intrigue where basically they're suing their governor, they're suing their boss. Essentially, Bessie, the education group in Louisiana, is saying we have these plans for Common Core, and so we want to stick with it. And I mean, I don't know how long this can last the way it is, but it does seem like Bobby Jindal is digging in. He's not getting scared back into the Common Core fold. And if you look at where the movement is, just the momentum is nationally, it certainly is against Common Core. States that had been for Common Core, like Indiana, like Oklahoma, reversing and backing away and saying, we've changed our mind, no, we're not going to do it. Louisiana could be next in that, and you don't see any states going the other direction, put it that way.
Well, it's fascinating and dismaying in a way. I mean, in California, with the Vergara ruling, people took a moment to acknowledge that there was sort of a Silicon Valley mentality behind the push for education reform in this way. When you have, you know, a venture capitalist leading the effort, finding the plaintiffs, that sort of, for some people that meant alarm bells were going off, and for others they said, yes, you need this kind of disruptive innovation in order to really change the game and transform education for the benefit of the American people.
I would call that something of a union narrative, where you say, when unions throw millions of dollars into ad campaigns to promote their point of view with respect to an establishment system, a monopoly public education system, that's all fine. That money is not corrupting. But money that comes to support reform is somehow evil, questionable, we have to worry about this, this is nefarious. Like, it's an obvious, put it this way, a self-serving way to look at some money being good and other money being corrupting.
Here's the twist. The king of the tech titans, Bill Gates, is the guy who's more or less single-handedly responsible for getting the ball rolling on Common Core in a way that was not democratic, that was not organic, that was not bottom-up. It was very much education sort of policy people, governors. Supposedly there were some parents' rights groups involved, but this was very much a top-down plan, and the controversy didn't even really start to heat up until it was being implemented.
That's right.
Until you had 46 states saying we're going to do this, and so come along.
Most people had never even heard of it until it was already law in their state. That's right, and you know, it's so I can make a couple of points to kind of add some layers to that. One is a lot of the Common Core tests, right? The assessments, as it's called. There are 2 state consortia which would be administering these: Smarter Balance and PARC. The other one is called. They'll use computers. They'll use a lot of Windows-based tablets and Windows-based computers to do these tests. So there are some who would allege that maybe Bill Gates' motives aren't entirely clean with respect to that. It's also fair to say that a lot of the state standards, No Child Left Behind ushered in the 90s, were really lame, low-bar standards. They were extremely easy to pass tests. The proficiency rates were double what what's called the NAEP test showed in terms of state proficiency rates. Like the percentage of 8th graders proficient in math, for example, would be measured at roughly double the rate on these easy state tests versus what the national NAEP test would show. So that was part of the rationale, and that was a valid reason to say, well, we need to make accountability, we need to make tests more rigorous. And so Common Core would raise that rigor and would have a common standard that would be tougher than some of these easy state tests. So they had a point in that regard. You know, my view is if a few states really did if Texas and Louisiana decided to get together and say, like, you know, people move back and forth from between our 2 states, let's kind of let's all agree to teach geometry this year. We'll all agree to teach Shakespeare in this year, and we'll kind of just get our standards aligned. I don't think anyone would have had a big problem with that. It was the federal footprint in which $1/3 of $1 billion of federal money was spent to set up this 2-state testing consortia in the first place. The waivers to No Child Left Behind were connected with going along with the Common Core. And also the Race to the Top initiative. The Obama initiative gave points for states that did things that the Obama administration liked, and one of the things was if you were moving toward Common Core, we'd give you more points on our Race to the Top competition. So there was a big federal footprint that, while sold as a state-led initiative, I think no one really believes that anymore. It's a lot of federal.
Even some California Democrats have been a bit annoyed with the Obama administration for saying, in effect, you don't get your money unless you implement Common Core on our timetable.
Right, and it's not just Common Core, it's a lot of other. Just this week there was a new initiative called the 50-state Teacher Equity Initiative, where they want states to develop these plans to make sure teacher quality is even across states. And they're correct, that teacher quality is not even across states, but the idea that the federal government should be like having these bureaucratic plans written and they'd be administered by some office in DC, that to me is folly. But so there are many federal involvements in education that I think are fraught with a lot of top-down bureaucracy.